Well, good morning, Explore, and good morning, everybody watching from home as well. There's a mega buzz around the room, and I don't know whether that's just because everyone's delighted to have survived the journey in through the English monsoon or what's going on, but what I can tell, like, audibly, the noise levels have lifted from yesterday as people are starting to discuss plans and hatching these amazing little ideas to go off around the world, doing fieldwork together, collecting data, and then, of course, bringing it back here to the RGS. And for those of you that haven't seen it, just outside there's a notice board that you can write your name or your plans on. There's one guy just saying, looking for friends. You haven't left a number. So you might be looking for friends, but they're not going to find you unless you put your number on there. But there's all kinds of things going on. There's an expedition to Oman. There's all kinds of stuff. So if you're a doctor looking for an expedition, or if you're an expedition looking for a doctor, whatever it is, have a look at the notice board just outside. That's where things start. But of course, things start with the conversations with the people around you. And I'm loving feeling the buzz in the room from the last, well, yesterday was good, but today it's just on another level entirely. Let's see where this clicker's working and we can get ourselves started, because I think I meant to talk for the next 15 minutes. There we are, that's me. Brilliant. So I'm going to spend the next little while talking to you about why fieldwork matters, and in particular, why fieldwork matters for trying to protect the planet. Now, my name is Niall McCann, or Dr. Niall McCann to my mum, and I'm the director of National Park Rescue. I'm co-chair of the Global End Pandemics Alliance. I'm a National Geographic explorer, and I'm a trustee and a fellow of the Royal Geographical Society. But first and foremost, I'm a field biologist, which means I like to experience and learn about the world through the soles of my feet. And through my fieldwork, I've come to love the planet, and in particular, the animals that live in there. And of course, we only protect that which we love. And so I've spent much of my adult life trying to convince people at all levels of society that wildlife matters as much to them as it does to me, so they'll protect it too. These days, most people are more or less aware of climate change and how important it is to their own lives that we mitigate its effects. But people are far less aware of biodiversity loss, which, in my opinion, is a greater threat than climate change. And one of the principal issues for this is that most people don't really know what biodiversity is, or really understand the impact that biodiversity, or its loss or degradation, has on human health, wealth, and well-being. Biodiversity is nature. It's the living planet. It's the birds in the air, the fish in the sea, the trees and the plants and all other living things. It's nature that creates the oxygen that we breathe. It cleans the water that we drink. It produces our food. It regulates our climate. And as we are now also painfully aware, it has a regulatory effect on the emergence of new infectious diseases. Over 50% of the world's GDP is moderately or highly dependent upon nature, and yet we continue in our relentless exploitation. In the past 50 years, as a direct result of human activities, global temperature has increased by 0.2 degrees a decade. We've lost about 60% of animal populations, and the rate of emergence of new infectious diseases has quadrupled in that time. And so it's pretty clear to me that if we want to continue to survive and even to thrive as a society, we must prioritize nature and nature-based solutions. But that comes easily to me. I was always going to be interested in nature because my entire family are biologists. My dad, who's the middle one, that one, Dad was a biologist. He spent 2.5 years living and working in Antarctica at a time when women were not allowed to go down south. And as you can see, desperate times call for desperate measures. My mum was a biologist who's worked from East Africa to Honduras and many, many places in between. My brother Finn is a biologist who's been on multiple remote area expeditions with me all around the world. And my brother Rory is a biologist, a conservationist, and a wildlife artist, and as far as I know, is the only living person ever to have read Harry Potter on the back of a giant tortoise. The other reason, from a young age, I've dedicated my life to working with endangered species because those are the ones that most need our help. And something I've come to realize about endangered species is that the reason they tend to become endangered is because of their interaction with humankind. And it's this human element that I want you all to think about for the duration of this talk. Because when it comes to conserving the planet, people are integral to everything. People are absolutely the problem, but they're the solution too. And it's the responsibility of all of us to engage people in conservation, to understand people's motivations in how they interact with the world around them, to help vulnerable people coexist with the sometimes dangerous wildlife that lives in their vicinity, and to make the case for conservation to people for whom conservation sometimes seems like a rich person's luxury. My career in conservation ostensibly started straight after my A-levels when all of my friends went off to places like Magaluf to go swimming in venereal disease. And I instead went off and spent 4.5 months volunteering for the Mauritius Wildlife Foundation. Now, Mauritius is famous because it no longer has any dodos, but it does still have 9 endemic species of bird, some of which have been perilously close to extinction, including the Mauritius echo parakeet, which was down to 7 individuals in the wild, and now numbers around 700, 750. There were only 5 Mauritius kestrels, 5 in the world, and there's now about 800. And all of these species, the others included, have been saved by one man, Dr. Carl Jones, and his small army of volunteers, of which I found myself a part. And it was that time that I started to realize the true impact that we as individuals can have on the world around us. After a few more years obtaining a degree in zoology, running around the jungles looking for animals, cutting my teeth a little bit, I found myself in Guyana on an expedition to map the biodiversity of a previously unsurveyed river. Now, Guyana is an astonishing country. It's the size of Great Britain, so the UK minus Northern Ireland, but it's got a population of only 800,000 people, so it's essentially empty. 76% of the country is still actually covered by primary rainforest, and the majority of the remaining 24% is natural savanna. So it's a true Eden. It's absolutely extraordinary. The maps that Rob and I were using to navigate where we were going are the only maps that existed for that region at this time. And they were drawn from a photograph taken in an aerial survey in 1970. And when you look down upon the maps, parts of it were white and said cloud, because when the photograph was taken, it was cloudy, and no one knew what was underneath there. And it was a wonderful thing for me and Rob to be going to parts of the world that were still literally blank on the map. We motored for 90 miles from the last Amerindian village, a village called the Rewa village, up to these extraordinary falls, the Corona Falls, which are a big divider for human traffic. So beneath the falls, you get some human traffic, Amerindian hunters and fishermen principally. Above the falls, nothing. And also a big divider for nature as well. So downstream, you get black caiman and stingrays and electric eels. Upstream, none of that, so we could swim with impunity. It took us about 2 days to carry all of our gear, 6 weeks' worth of food and fuel, around these waterfalls. And no sooner had we arrived in above the falls, in the headwaters of the Rewa River, than we came across our first true giant of the Amazon, a silk cotton tree, a kapok tree, a type of tree that the film Avatar is based on. And then 800 yards beyond that, we came across that. Now that is an anaconda. It turns out to be one of the largest snakes ever seen on Earth, as it happens. It was 18 feet and 2 inches in length. That's 5.55 meters. Had a girth of 27 inches. That's the girth of you. That's a human being's girth. And you can see that we were all massively excited about this, taking the measurements and contributing that to Dr. Jesus Rivas, who was doing his PhD on anacondas. Just hugely exhilarated, all except for that guy there. Because a snake's cloaca, out of which it defecates, craps, for those of you that wanted it, is there. And for anyone that's ever held a snake, you'll know that if a snake is stressed, it craps on everything. And that is a very large snake that was able to pump an enormous amount of foul-smelling wrongness all over one very small man who was just head to toe in this horrendous, horrendous musk. Awful. Now, we spent 6 weeks in the area, and we discovered just some astonishing things. From one of the largest snakes ever seen to giant anteaters living inside the Amazon. I didn't know that they are there, but they are there. We also recorded puma, ocelot, margay, jaguarundi, jaguar. In total, we recorded 50% of Guyana's endangered species on that one small river. And yet, when we returned to the capital, Georgetown, we discovered that the entire river was owned by gold miners. And they planned to mine the river using mercury as an amalgam, which would kill everything. And we just couldn't let that happen, but what could we do? We were 2 27-year-old British biologists 5,000 miles away from home, but we had to try something. So we got back to the UK, and we wrote up our report detailing the exquisite nature of the biodiversity and the explicit nature of the threats to that biodiversity. And we had that report published in as high a profile place as we possibly could, Institute of Zoology's Conservation Project Report number 10. And we sent it to everyone that we could think of. And it landed on the desk of the former head of the Guyanese military, Major General Joe Singh, and he took it to the president. And so 6 months after we returned from Guyana, every one of those gold mining claims was revoked by presidential decree. So we've managed to do something. Later on that year, I started my PhD on Baird's tapir in Honduras. Now, Baird's tapir is the largest mammal in the Americas, and also one of the rarest, so much so that despite spending 5 years doing a PhD, I've never actually seen one alive, which bugs me to this day. I spent about a year in the field, visiting some incredibly remote places where the local people had never seen outsiders before. seeing some things that outsiders had never seen before. My brother's a normal-sized human being, and we still do not know what that plant is. And I took this photograph and I sent it to a Honduran botanist and said, "What do you make of that?" And he looked at me and went, "That's surprising." Which was just the best possible response he could have given. It was wonderful. We still don't know what it is. Now, Honduras isn't famous for much, but it is famous for its violence, and principally its narco-related violence. And if you look at this photograph, that guy's carrying a gun, that guy's carrying a gun, and that guy in the door slept with a pistol under his pillow for every night that my brother and I spent in this place, genuinely worried that we might be robbed by narco-trafficantes. At the time we were there was an intentional homicide rate of about 1 person per 1,000 per year. So someone you know per year involved in an intentional homicide. I came to understand that if people are genuinely concerned for their lives or where their next meal is coming from, they can't reasonably be expected to worry about conservation, about why they shouldn't shoot a jaguar or chop down the forest. As far as they were concerned, they received no tangible benefit from living next to a national park, and they certainly gave no consideration in terms of lost ecosystem services if the forest was to continue to be degraded. They were simply worried about surviving from day to day and week to week. And most of the work that I did in Honduras was at a field site in the northwest of the country called Cusuco National Park. It's beautiful, it's tiny, it's only about 15 miles wide and 10 miles deep, and yet it's got 7 species of amphibian that live only there, nowhere else in the world. There's an entire genus of tree that is only known from that one national park. And the greatest privilege about being there was the fact that I wasn't alone. I was with dozens of other scientists, specialists in all these other fields, whose research and insight enabled me to see the types of things that I would never have seen if I was just working by myself. Types of things that I may never necessarily wanted to have seen if I was just out there by myself. And enabled me to make some discoveries that would have otherwise gone unknown and unnoticed to science, such as finally answering the age-old question as to why a crab is used as the astrological sign for cancer. Through the course of my research, what I discovered was that the population of tapirs was dropping off a cliff. And this was indicative of a wider degradation of the park itself. Pesticides were being used, which are poisoning the waters. The waterways were being silted up. The forest was being degraded. And all of this was having a knock-on negative impact on the population around it. But none of it mattered to the government. They just didn't care. Until the summer of 2012, when I discovered marijuana growing inside the national park. And I knew I had a hook. So I flew back to Honduras in August 2012, and I met with the Minister for Environment, and I explained the situation in Cusuco National Park. And while I was in the room with him, he picked up the phone to the Minister of Defense, who authorized the military to go in and clear the national park of illegal activity. And at the same time, they authorized me to set up a community ranger team to patrol the national park throughout the year and report on new illegal activity, poaching and deforestation, report it to the authorities that they can then take action. And here we are a decade later, and we now have 11 full-time community rangers patrolling that park every day, and they're having a massive deterrent effect. Last July was the first month when we recorded no new incidents of poaching or any form of illegal activity inside the park. And despite my dire predictions, tapirs are still living inside that national park and still thriving. We've had jaguar, we've had puma in that park, which had never been seen before. So we've managed to do something through this community program, and it's still going today, and I hope it will still going in perpetuity. And this point in my life was absolutely critical in making me realize that the most important thing I could do with my career was not to study conservation, but to practice it. The difference is subtle but important. I wanted to dedicate my life to actively protecting species and habitats and taking on the greatest challenges that the world is facing today, which is climate change, biodiversity loss, and the emergence of new infectious diseases. Now, all of these stem from the fact that humankind's relationship with nature is fundamentally broken, and so it's become my principal professional focus to try and undo that broken relationship. And perhaps the most conspicuous way in which our relationship with nature is broken and cruel and unsustainable is the commercial poaching of wildlife. Many species around the world are affected by poaching. Huge numbers of lions, rhinos, and in particular pangolins are poached every single year, sent principally out to Southeast Asia because some people value their body parts as fake medicine or as status symbols. But perhaps most famous of all is the plight of Africa's elephants, which have been killed in insane numbers for the ivory that they carry. When I was born, in 1981, there were 1.2 million elephants left in Africa. And now, 41 years later, there are around 400,000. And we still continue to lose somewhere in the region of 20,000 elephants a year, simply because of greed by one set of people. and complacency by everyone else. And when I say complacency, I mean that there's hundreds of charities that say they're protecting elephants. But if we're still losing tens of thousands a year, then clearly they're not doing a very good job of it, which means they're being complacent. And so it was against this background that I teamed up with my friend Mark Hiley, and we set up National Park Rescue, a charity dedicated to identifying national parks that cannot cope with the poaching crisis, and for want of a better word, trying to save them. After a highly successful pilot operation in Luonde National Park in Malawi, we moved our attention to Chizarira National Park in Zimbabwe, which is just an extraordinary place. But in the 10 years before we started there, it had lost 3,000 elephants, similar numbers of buffalo. When we first arrived in 2017, the rangers were poorly paid, poorly trained, poorly motivated, and they had no working vehicles. They were many months in arrears, really not performing at the level that they could. But in the 5 years of our intervention, we've managed to turn things around. Now, our focus is threefold. It's law enforcement, it's infrastructure, and it's community. We must get the law enforcement right so that you're a hard target that poachers don't want to deal with. The biggest improvement we've seen in terms of law enforcement performance has been when we introduced a tokenized reward scheme for the rangers, whereby they're awarded tokens that we call sables for high performance. And they can redeem those tokens for cash or for building materials, or we double the value of those tokens if they redeem them for school fees or medical bills. And as a result of this intervention, our 35 or so rangers are putting their children through school and getting the healthcare that they need. And they're doing so by performing well on the job, and we've seen a marked improvement in their performance. But key to everything is integrating the local communities, creating a microeconomy between the park and the communities that surround it so that they're interdependent. And we do that principally through job creation and commerce. We've become the largest local employer, providing sustainable employment and commerce to local businesses and local people. We employ 32 people from the villages that surround the park. And in the past 5 years, the results have been quite astonishing. Arrests have gone up by 300% in comparison to the 4 years before. Snare removals up by 400%. Elephant poaching down by 90%. Lion numbers up by 92%. And tourism numbers up an astonishing 50 times. I was just there 6 weeks ago, and we had 4 times as many visitors in September as we had in the entirety of 2017, which for me is just proof that everything we've been working towards for the past 5 years is working. But I'm also very conscious that that success is just on the scale of one national park and the surrounding areas. And that if we really want to save the world, we need everybody to be playing for the planet. We need the public to marvel at nature, to be considerate in their consumption, and to vote for politicians that prioritize the planet. We need politicians to think beyond 5-year voting cycles, implement the types of policies that will guarantee mitigating the impacts of climate change, biodiversity loss, and new emerging diseases. We need businesses to truly green their production and their supply chains and achieve real sustainability, regenerative practice as opposed to just sustainable practice, and with around $110 trillion worth of investable capital at their disposal. We need investors to invest in the businesses and the sectors that achieve a rate of return for the planet as well as for their shareholders. And this is where fieldwork is so important. We need people like you out there in the field, collecting the data, the images, and the stories that cut through. I know that my fieldwork grounds and legitimizes all my lobbying and all of my broadcasting. That every conversation I have with members of the public, with politicians, with businesses, and with financiers is so much stronger because I can draw upon the experiences that I have had in the field. Fieldwork teaches us so much, but perhaps the most important thing is that it teaches us the world is not ours alone. It is ours to share, and we must start treating it as such. Right now, the world needs bold and visionary leaders in all fields who understand that human health and animal health and planetary health are all one health, who account for the fact that we are a part of nature, not apart from nature, and above all, who are motivated to make the world a better place. Thank you very much.